Howdy, y'all. I'm TJ Markey, and I want to talk about He-Man. So, why am I commenting on this right now? Well, I think one of the major problems with this so-called reboot or sequel or whatever it is actually a writing issue and not one of the other things that you may have seen people blaming it on. There are issues of worldview, issues of intent, and what the producers and writers and everybody wanted to do with this, if they wanted to use it as a vehicle for their own messages and stuff like that. I think that's pretty natural. That happens with pretty much everything. But I think the main problem that people are having with the show, whether they realize it or not, is a structural thing. So first, let me start with what He-Man means to me. I wouldn't call myself a fan exactly, but at the same time, he's a hero, and it's a world and a style of fantasy that's gotten entrenched in my soul because I grew up with that stuff, right? So it kind of makes me think of a playground that's kind of half remembered from your childhood. It's somewhere you were, somewhere you played. You may have even spent a lot of time there with friends or just by yourself when your parents took you there or whatever, but it's still got this kind of mythical quality. It's half remembered, almost like a dream sometimes. So there may be aspects of it that you have made more fanciful in your memory than they actually were, right? Different things about it that you remember incorrectly or are out of proportion in your memory because you were a kid. That's kind of what He-Man is to me. I watched it. I don't remember any of the plots. If I go watch it now, the general vibe is familiar, and Skeletor's funny.
I didn't know you could do that.
I could write a book about what you don't know.
And He-Man's a hero and all that stuff, but it's nothing that I ever memorized. I know there are more hardcore fans of Masters of the Universe besides myself. I think it's a fairly small fandom compared to some of the others, but that's what it means to me. He's an innocent hero, more innocent than some of the others I can think of, certainly on par with Superman or certain manifestations of Goku, and he just does the right thing. He's powerful. He's got what he needs to protect the people around him, and apparently protect the universe at large. And he uses it for what he thinks is right, which is implied in normal He-Man stories. It's implied that he's also aligned with good. He's doing the right thing. So he's not using his power foolishly. He's not using it for personal gain or anything like that. I've watched a little bit of the 2000 reboot or 2002, whatever it was, and I think there he was a little more reluctant at first, but eventually he takes up the mantle of He-Man and does his job. I think that's part of what we like about him, and that's why we expected it to be about him, right? It's not Masters of the Universe, especially to me, who has mostly images of He-Man and Skeletor, and to a slightly lesser extent, Man-at-Arms. It's He-Man. I've always called it He-Man. I always thought about it as He-Man. So I expected him to be the main character. And that was part of a lot of people's problem with it, right? Bothered me some because, again, if I was going to watch it, I wanted to see He-Man and see his adventures and stories. But we could deal with that if it weren't for the other problem, the real problem. And I think that problem is the structure. So what do I mean by that? Well, and there's going to be spoilers here, the whole story is framed in between He-Man's failure, in between his deaths. It's okay to push a character through death or to have your hero die and even not come back, but this one did not feel earned. And again, I think that was because of the choice of structure. As it sits, we dropped in with Teela at a high point. We never got to see her journey to becoming what she was, to earning her title of Man-at-Arms, and we immediately get launched into a swift defeat at Grayskull with no setup. There's the issue. Twice in a very small period of time, we have huge moments that get no setup at all, right? We didn't get to see what it took for Teela to gain her title. We just know that we're told that everyone's proud of her. We're shown that she is proud of herself and she feels like she got what she deserved. We can accept that, but it would have been better for this, if it was going to be a Teela story, to see that. Ideally, I would make that Teela story, that Teela arc, the first season, or maybe the first act if we're going to put this whole story in one season. Part of what this would also do is set us up to expect He-Man as a cameo rather than the main character. Because again, to many of us, this is the He-Man show, not any of the Masters of the Universe. The second season or the second act would get more into how Skeletor pulled off his invasion and victory at the beginning, rather than just telling us he was finally smart enough. The way that it's set up here, he kind of just does the same thing he would always do, except it randomly works. And again, I think that's a structural problem. We needed the setup for that. What kinds of things did Skeletor do that made this particular push to take over the castle actually work? And a lot like He-Man, we love Skeletor. We love to see him at work, devising his plans, insulting his minions,
Fleabag!
and all that kind of stuff. Here, we barely got any time with him at all. And even though I don't think that Mark Hamill's voice was the perfect choice for me for Skeletor, it would still be really enjoyable to hear him do a full Skeletor arc, rather than just a couple of cameo scenes. So let's say that everything to that point goes the same way, then the third season or the third act would deal with the aftermath of He-Man's death and the fetch quest to restore magic. While there are things that I would change about the characterization and maybe the cast composition and all that stuff, overall, if this is the kind of story someone wanted to do, it would work from that point out. It just was severely lacking in setup to make it really count. When you're going to build up to a major hero's fall and death and failure, it really needs to be set up. We should see He-Man gradually more and more challenged by Skeletor's increasing might and his increasing cunning. We need to see He-Man pushed to his limits, put on the ropes. He needs to have been pressed really hard by his duties as champion before finally making the ultimate sacrifice of his life to save the universe. Because all of that was in character for him. Made perfect sense and it could work. Again, just lacking in setup. This would also help us with He-Man's second death and the cliffhanger of Skeletor finally taking over the castle. Because in an expanded He-Man universe, in a longer story, that actually does make sense for it to happen eventually. It happened at the end of the movie from the 80s, which personally I think is more enjoyable than many people give it credit for. So that failure at the cliffhanger would feel much less cheap, and Skeletor's presumably false victory less rushed if the heroes had been put through any kind of proper ringer before it happened. Overall, the story just felt too rushed, cramming too many important beats in without setup just so they could feature Teela, degrade He-Man, and shock us with his death. There are, of course, other writing issues with the show, some dialogue stuff, some other character things, but there are some bright spots, and the whole thing is painted with mostly gorgeous visuals, even if we don't quite agree on some of the character designs. But I think the structural problem, the fact that this arc is taken out of an invisible larger story, is the main problem. So let this be a lesson to all writers: take your time with the stories that call for it. Don't kill your heroes unceremoniously, and definitely don't degrade them. So that's what I think is the real problem with Masters of the Universe Revelation, perhaps better known as He-Man. Leave a comment if you have any thoughts, like and subscribe, and come back for more content like this. Peace.